Welcome back to Game Changer Sessions and Happy New Year. It is our first session in 2021, and I'm so delighted and excited to be back. For those of you who are joining for the first time, Game Changer Sessions is a free weekly live stream, and this particular series is all about leading and thriving in 2021. And we've pulled together some incredible thought leaders, investors, entrepreneurs, disruptors, to really bring to our community some really interesting perspectives on what it means to lead and thrive in this new year. Previous guests on this particular series have been Ryan Holiday, who's an incredible thought leader around Stoicism, Jonathan Goodman, who is the chairman of Deloitte, Christine Stewart from the World Economic Forum, Janet Bannister, who's an incredible investor in our ecosystem. And I am so excited to introduce today our guest, Vicki Saunders. And Vicki is a serial entrepreneur. She is an award-winning mentor and a leading advocate for entrepreneurship. And she really sees entrepreneurship as a way of creating positive transformation in the world. And of course, I definitely agree. SheEO, which is the company and the nonprofit that Vicki has created, is a global ecosystem that is radically changing how female founders are supported and financed. And we'll dive very deep into what Vicki is doing. But Vicki has a long background of working in innovation and entrepreneurship. She co-founded and ran ventures in Europe, Toronto, and Silicon Valley, and she even took a company public on the Toronto Stock Exchange. She has many awards. In fact, I had to update them because some are super recent, including the 2020 UBS Global Visionary Award and also a YWCA Women of Distinction Award. So Vicki, if you want to turn on your camera and join us, it is so wonderful to have you with us today.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Oh, absolutely. I should mention I have known Vicki for a long time. I think right when you were getting going, we chatted a couple of years ago, and
Definitely.
it brings me so much joy. I think there were I don't know how many activators then, but maybe none yet, or like very few. And Vicki was just telling me the staggering number of activators that she's created, which we'll save for later in the show. Vicki, you have a phenomenal background and such an interesting journey. I would love to start our conversation today just giving people a perspective on sort of how you got to where you are. Tell us about your journey.
So when I was 5, now I won't go back that far, but I think I always had this deep desire within me to create a positive impact. Like I wanted to do something big in the world. And I just remember as I was getting started, looking around me in the sort of bubble that I grew up in. It was mostly like teachers and farmers. That's what I come from, teachers and farmers, and was surrounded by my parents' friends, looking at what they did with their life, and I just didn't see around me something that felt like, oh, that's what I want to do. Right? There just wasn't a thing. And so I remember talking to an early mentor of mine who was like, just make a huge list of all the things you think you might like and just get started. And so I did that. And for many years, I never thought of being an entrepreneur. Like it wasn't a cool thing to do when I was getting going in the world. Nobody talked about entrepreneurs. It wasn't really in the lexicon at all. You sort of like got a job, and you joined that universe, which is kind of curious because I grew up in a very entrepreneurial family, but we didn't talk about entrepreneurship as a thing. It was business. And so, I grew up in this farm, SaundersFarm.com, which is now very well known in the Ottawa region. It's been around for about 40 years. And my entire childhood was like dreaming at the dinner table about what we were going to go create. And then we'd go out and build it. And then we'd come back and how did that go? What did we learn? What do we want to do the next time?
Wow.
So now when I look back on it, I was completely prepared for what I'm doing right now, right? Like just iterating, trying things and growing. But in the early days, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I'm not the kid who had the lemonade stand and always talked about being in business, not that at all. For me, this entrepreneurial drive and my journey has been very much about how do you create a positive impact in the world and make money at the same time. So kind of original social entrepreneur before we even had that title. We just, it's a new thing.
Oh, I love that. I mean, I love so much about what you're saying. In particular, that just like make the list and get started, right?
Yeah.
That like move to action. And then what I also love is it's not about the money, right? It's about the creating the change. And I think that's what's always been so inspiring to me in terms of what you are creating. And, for those of our community who don't know a lot about SheEO, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about how you're building this incredible ecosystem to support entrepreneurship?
Sure. So I have always kind of had this thread of a question around how do you create the conditions for people to thrive? How do you create like a safe environment for people to test out ideas and to go forward with those big dreams that are inside of them? And I've done a lot of experimenting. Like over the last 25 to 30 years, I have launched tons of different initiatives all around innovation business, done it with different segments, like did a whole bunch of stuff with youth in my early days. And women is a new thing for me, having been one my whole life, but having avoided doing anything woman only forever, because I grew up in a family full of boys and at a time where anything woman only was kind of like not worthy, sidebarred, gets like 1/1000th of the money, still happens today. But there was like a very conditioned environment that a lot of us grew up in, which is like, you have to get into the boys club, right? Not create the girls club. And so that was a factor in how I got to where I am right now. And so the model with SheEO is just, about right after I turned 50, about 6 years ago, I was mentoring this amazing young woman through a program in Canada that was identifying best and brightest young talent. And I watched how this program conditioned women to think like, you shouldn't do stuff social, grow as fast as you can, step over each other to win, like a very old leadership model from my perspective. And it was a lot of the stuff that just doesn't fit naturally with me. And I saw this next generation, especially coming along, they want to do business really differently. Like, why do you have to work 24/7? Says who? It's like all made up. Winner takes all. Win the whole market, scale it or die. And I just think it's like, it's a pendulum completely out of balance with what the world needs right now. We are so on the edge of like out of balance that we have to put words in front of words. Impact investor, social entrepreneur. Like it's quite broken from my perspective. And so a lot of the women entrepreneurs that I was mentoring were doing like amazing businesses that were about creating positive change. They saw something in the world and they're like, I need to fix this. And of course they want to make money doing it. And they wanted to replicate these models around the world and grow them. But they weren't driven by like, what's a market niche and how do I maximize my profit, right? And grow big at all costs. That wasn't the vibe. And in the business world right now, we really only have one playbook. There's one. Like I can tell you what every single incubator and accelerator would tell me at this stage of SheEO, what I should do. And it's not right for me.
And what is that, Vicki?
What they would say? Oh yeah.
What like, would they say and what's not right for you?
Yeah.
I'm interested in both.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. I could like literally go through the whole list. But when we first started, our model at SheEO is access capital from thousands of women. So it's an $1,100 contribution. It's a gift. First of all, what the hell is that? A gift? You want women to gift money? They don't get a tax receipt. They don't get their money back. What? How is that? Like, you want me to gift my money? So right away, they're like, that's a weird thing. And we pool all this money together in relationship with each other. And then we go online as a community and we vote for entrepreneurs, majority women-owned, women-led, who are working on the SDGs. And we vote for the ones that we're most excited about.
What SDGs are?
Yeah.
Sorry.
On the Sustainable Development Goals, which we call the world's to-do list. It is literally every government has signed on to these are the global priorities. So we're funding majority women-owned, women-led, revenue-generating ventures that are working on the Sustainable Development Goals. So very specific set of things, because we think at this moment in time, with all the challenges we're facing, we should only be putting our capital towards things that create a better world. Why would we want to create more inequality, more harm to the universe,
Right.
etc.? And so all of us go online and we vote together. Okay. Any's like sort of like normal VC-ish person, like, what? There's no investment committee of experts deciding? And I'm like, nope. And because there's a ton of data to show that collective intelligence is way more effective than experts. And so we trust the intuition of hundreds of women to vote. And we happen to have highly tuned intuition as women. And so we have amazing results as we do that. And then we provide these ventures with a 0% interest loan, which again, what is that? 0% interest? How are you going to maintain your fund? Like all those normal questions. Well, 6 years ago when we started this, we had a lot of those questions. Now, Denmark just announced a 20-year 0% interest mortgage. Like capital's free. We're living in a completely different world. How do we use our capital to create the kind of world we want versus make more money? So all these pieces are very different. And then the biggest sort of ecosystem-based approach around what we do with SheEO is it feels like the universe of people out there have like really doubled down on money, money, money. Money's the answer to everything. And my personal experience as an entrepreneur over and over is you need expertise on demand. You need access to influencers to open doors for you that you don't have. You need emotional support along the way. You've got this. You can do this, Candice. I know it's hard. You're in the trough. Come on. Yeah. As opposed to suck it up, deal with it, Candice. You know, like that stuff, the very sort of like heavy advice, you're on your own, do it by yourself. And this whole vibe around the hero and like, you need to know how to do all these things yourself. You should figure all these things out. SheEO has the opposite vibe, which is like, hey, Candice, you're good at those two things and you're not at those others. Don't do those things because we got you covered in the community. Everybody's here to help. So we're sleeves rolled up, ready to help one another with this spirit of being radically generous. And so we don't say things like, oh my God, her pitch is so bad. We're like, oh, interesting. At this point, that's not her strength. Okay, listen deeply to what's under there. What's the nugget? What's the genius? And not make everybody be this charismatic, boisterous, I'm going to disrupt the universe leader. That's not everybody's leadership vibe. It's a very, very small percentage. And so we don't do pitches. And so almost everything we do looks at what are the assets women have that haven't been designed into our existing models. And we leverage all of those assets of the community to create better outcomes than the existing model. And all of this started because, as you know, and you're going through this experience now, 2.2% of venture capital goes to 51% of the population. And it's statistically impossible for that to occur without massive biases built into our structures and systems. So people are starting to understand that. Like just creating a women's fund with the existing playbook doesn't help. It doesn't get you there. No. You have to rethink it, redesign it, change it up. And it's hard to imagine doing things differently when we're so embedded in this way of doing things and we think it's the only way.
Wow. I mean, it was amazing. I know it because I've sort of watched you and it's been so beautiful to watch you build this community. And I just have so much inspiration to see you, you know, really take action. Like, as you said, just get started on creating the model that you want to see in the world. And, you know, I think 2020 for many of us really highlighted what is so fundamentally broken. And so seeing people like you who are creating new models is, you know, ultimately actually what Game Changer is all about. We're all about what are the new models, the new mindsets to create the future we actually want. Clearly, we're very aligned with you know, inspiring people like you. And also just, it's not good enough to just survive this. You know, what are those conditions to actually really thrive as human beings, as leaders? And so much of what you're talking about, I think, is really resonating today. I'd love to sort of turn to reflecting on 2020, because that's really what the series is hyper focused on for people, is how do you thrive in 2021? And our belief is, you know, learning is actually not just about experience, it's about reflecting on that experience. I'd love to know, what did you learn in 2020, as well as what did SheEO learn in 2020?
Yeah, it was a really fascinating, I mean, it's been a challenging, exciting, painful year, everything, all the feels, as our team says. And so one of the things that our community, I would say, learned this year is together, we have everything we need. We just do. And isolated and separate, we are in scarcity, in pain. It's harder. It's just really challenging if you're by yourself and not connected. And so how do you get into community together? And so the crisis, when the pandemic was announced, just called it was so energizing to the SheEO community. It brought us all together. Within a couple of days, we rallied our 68 ventures at the time to come together. And we did a quick triage, red, yellow, green. How are you? Like, what stage are you at? And we have continued to triage that every couple of weeks, because you're on a journey. It's like, oh, everything's okay. Oh my God, I just lost 95% of my customers. Oh no, it's good. Oh no, and like New Zealand, we're fine. We're open again. Oh, we're shut down again. And so the business conditions were changing weekly. And so to just be aware that we've got this. So our community came together and started to support each other even more than we already were, because it was a crisis level thing. And so for activators, who are the women who contribute capital, supporting the ventures, that was a big deal. But then the other thing that started to happen is activators, we started doing calls every single week in every country. So you have 5 calls a week in the 5 countries we're in. And we got into breakout groups and just practiced this giving and receiving to each other. What do you need? How can I help? And each week there was this like hashtag SheEO magic of, oh my God, I was in a breakout room, I asked for this, and there was a person in there who knows how to do that. What? Over and we're like, yeah, that's what happens when you get in a relationship and people want to support one another. And so the practice of that week over week really had us start to go from this place of just keeping the doors open and just surviving to starting to thrive, to your point. So by the end of the year, people really recognized that if there are people out there that want to support you, but you have to ask. And most of us aren't conditioned to ask. We're like, oh, Candice is too busy. She said she'd help, but I think she's probably got too much going on. She's got 2 little kids at home. Like, and this is like, no, please, permission to ask, because if you don't ask me, I can't share what I have as my gifts that are in overflow. And so we've really built this muscle of giving and receiving, of asking for help and giving help to one another. And it's, none of our ventures have gone down during this time.
Wow. And how many ventures do you have, Vicki? Like, what's the current
we have 73.
status on that?
Yeah, we have 73 at the moment, and we're about to have, we're just about to fund another 21 or 22 in the next couple of months. So we're getting close to that, 100 ventures in the portfolio and over 6,000 activators. So we have this very robust network of radically generous women who are really building the muscle of giving and receiving with one another. And it's a very, I would say, like a very high quality environment. Like, you don't come into this environment unless you are radically generous.
Right.
Like if that doesn't resonate with you, you don't show up. Like, so takers aren't here, right? It's a very different kind of vibe. And so that's been huge. And for me, I have learned the same thing too. Like, your greatest strength is your greatest weakness all the time, right? Like I lived for a really, really long time as a leader in scarcity, thinking I had to do everything myself. And it's like the biggest lie I think we're told in the world is that you have to do this yourself. And I have just learned over time to focus on what I'm amazing at and surround myself with people who are amazing at things I'm not amazing at. It's the answer to life. Like, I swear, it just makes everything so much more fun. Like, if I wake up every day going, oh, I have to do spreadsheets, I'm like, no, thank you. But I have people who love doing spreadsheets all day long. That's amazing, right? And so recognizing that there are people who like to do things that you don't, and then getting in community with them is just, it's delicious.
Well, there's just so much wisdom in what you're saying, and so many parts are resonating so deeply. I mean, I too lived in a place of scarcity for most of my life, I would say, as an immigrant, as somebody who, and then it was really only in sort of understanding that abundance is within, and within community, ultimately, that life, is just that much more. I love the word you just used, which is delicious, right? Which is like, wow, it can be like this. And so what advice do you have for, we have over 107 people on the call, and I'm going to bet that many people are inspired by this idea of living in abundance, right? And being open to allowing and receiving and giving and receiving. But I'm curious if you have some ideas on how people can get there. What do they need to let go of in order to be able to sort of be in the place you're in around that?
Oh God, yeah. Like there's so much deconditioning, unraveling,
Mm-hmm.
letting go. You say, I mean, there's so much personal work in this transformation that we need to do. It starts with us, right? So
Mm-hmm.
for example, I have met a ton of people who are like, I've been following SheEO. It's amazing what you're doing. And I'm like, oh, are you an activator? Oh, no, I'm not ready yet. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? And this like permission, imagine giving yourself permission to walk through a door where you were by yourself, feeling alone. And all of a sudden you walk through the door and the first thing you hear on every single call, every email you get is, how can we help? What do you
Mm-hmm.
need?
Mm-hmm.
And giving yourself permission to get the help. You're ready when you're ready. It doesn't mean, oh, I have to be a VP before I do that, or I have to like get to $600,000 in revenue before I could join this community. Like step in as early as possible for the gift of being in abundance. Like that's the opportunity. And so I think that the letting go piece is, would you choose yourself?
Mm-hmm.
We're in a world where we're waiting to be like, oh, I can be part of that club now because they picked me. No, that's not the world I want to live in. I want to live in a place where you select yourself, you pick yourself, and you decide that I can be in a place like this. I deserve this. I'm going to give this to myself to change my conditions for next year. I think that's a thing.
Can I just
Yeah,
pause
go,
on that one?
please.
Because it's
Yeah,
so interesting to me. I loved, originally when I heard radical generosity, you immediately think of giving to others. And I think a
yeah,
lot of people who are in a scarce mindset don't feel like they have enough to give to
yeah,
others. But
exactly.
actually, what you're pinpointing is the radical generosity starts with yourself. It's how
Totally.
do you give to yourself? How do
Exactly.
you
Yep.
not wait? I loved what you just said, which is not wait to be chosen, but you choosing you,
Yeah.
which is just
It's
really,
hard,
really,
right?
really
It's
hard.
hard because you've been conditioned. We have all been conditioned to think that we're not enough
Mm-hmm.
and to think that we're not ready yet. And I need to take another course. And oh, I couldn't be in the same group as that person.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's the hard part. We've created a bar for you. And then we've made it way more simple in the last few years. And it's like literally $92 a month to have an
Mm-hmm.
on-demand network to support you that you can support. It's like if you're not spending $92 a month on your biz dev,
Right.
really. So I just think of it from that perspective. And I also know it's hard because we're in such scarcity.
Yeah.
It's been a giant conditioning that we need to unravel. It's the only thing that's going to help us get to the future is understanding we have everything we need.
Yeah. Really, I cut you off though, so I'm going to let you. You had something else you wanted to say. My question was really
Yeah.
around how to shift to an abundant
Yeah.
mindset. First is choosing
Yeah.
yourself and radical generosity.
Yeah. I think that's a big one. And then, the number one question I get uh, from almost everybody is, am I doing this right?
Mm.
As if there's like some presumed path forward. And I think this is a really damaging narrative that we have, that there is some right way of doing things. Like, am I going to market in the right way? I don't know. Does it feel right? Like, if we follow in the future what we've done in the past, we are going to be in so much more trouble. We're at this moment where we really need to reinvent things. There are so many different definitions of success, and we only have one.
Mm-hmm.
Go big. And so getting to this place where we understand, especially during a pandemic, oh my God, like how much do we need to go? Like this year, my goals are like this compared to what they might be, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I think reframing what feels right for you, what works for you. We have an economic model and a way of being in community, which is quite damaging to humans, I think. And we need to rethink it. We can do business in different ways. We can be in relationship in different ways. And so getting into your imagination and breaking down this feeling like there is a right way to do things, I think is a very important thing.
So I want to poke at that.
Yeah.
Tell us about the economic model that's broken, and tell us
Yeah.
about how SheEO is really changing that. I mean, I think you've talked at a high level about that so
Yeah.
far, but I think it's
Uh-huh.
worth actually explaining to people sort of the
Yeah.
observations or reflections you saw as to how
Sure.
broken the model is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember when I first started about 6 years ago, I'd be like, everything's broken. What a great time to be alive. And people would be like, really? What's broken? And why is it good to be alive in a broken time? And it's, we can see it now with the unraveling around our leadership and our systems and structures as people start to like the racial reckoning, just looking at how stacked the deck is against most people. And so when I look at the economic model, I think we're very like, I'll just give an example, like, the yin yang, bifurcated duality that we're always talking about, either or, win, lose. We have an economic model which is really problematic because anything that you do right now in the traditional way of the world to go make money usually hurts somebody. We're creating more inequality every single day. Look at what happened during the pandemic. Bezos, gained $100 billion in like 5 people have the same wealth as half the planet. That economic model has played out the game. There are winners. It's over. They own everything. They've monopolized everything. We're in this like vicious loop that makes things worse each day for people. The inequality gap is massive. So almost this like pursuit of making more money to do what? You can't eat it. You can't take it with you. So like trillionaires as a thought is insane. Billionaires as a thought is still an insane thing. I love AOC's comment where you don't make $1 billion, you take $1 billion through the predatory rules.
Whose comment is that? I just
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez,
yes.
AOC, right? And so I think we have an economic model that's creating more and more inequality, more and more environmental harm, really stressing out humans to work 24/7. So that part's not working and we need to rethink it. And on the flip side, we have a sort of philanthropic model where we're like, oh, well, I'll just give it away. I'll pillage and then I'll try and fix it by giving it away, but it's just not sufficient. So we need to think of how can we use the capital that we have to create the kind of world we want to live in.
Right.
And during the pandemic, we've seen we have more than enough money to create whatever kind of world we want. We really do. Governments are printing money, 0% interest. So what do we want to use our money for? To make more? For what reason? Right? What if we rethought where money went? And if you do the sort of parallel in the food universe of the life, we have more than enough food for everyone. It's just distributed unevenly.
Right.
So how do we create a new distribution of where capital goes? And so I think about the economic model that way. And so at SheEO, we gift this capital to women who have great business ideas, who are solving major challenges we're facing. They use that money as a 0% interest loan over 5 years for a time to get themselves up to the next level. They pay it back and then someone else uses it. And it's kept in flow continuously. The money just keeps rolling forward. And I noticed that someone asked a question around, what do you get from the ventures? And it's like, we get the satisfaction that they are out there every single day, stretched, creating new solutions that make everything better in the world. That helps all of us. We're not trying to take something from those entrepreneurs. We're putting them on a pedestal and saying, thank you. Oh my God, thank you for what you're doing. It's so needed. It's so important. And I know it's so hard because a lot of them are working against systems to create new ones. And we're here with you. What do you need? Support. You want us to be a customer, advice, expertise, like we're here. And so it's a different vibe. We're not trying to make money off these people. We're literally making sure these things happen in the world.
I just also, to just pinpoint on some of your language, what do you get? I wrote my 2020, my top 10 lessons that I shared with this community a couple of days ago. And my top one, the number 10 was generosity, right? As the biggest gift I got this year was from those experiences of giving. I mean, even Game Changer for me is just something that I just love, giving the wisdom of people like you. And I think it is a really powerful unlearning or rethinking to understand that, and just how much joy, meaning, purpose can come from that. And so I really think what you're doing is amazing for both the entrepreneurs and activators. What I'm really interested in is sort of thinking about, not everybody is sort of in an environment that is as wonderful and warm as the SheEO environment. And so I'd love to get some of your thoughts and advice for women in the world more broadly around practices, rituals that you use to really be at your best and to lead from a place of radical generosity to yourself. What are some of the things that you have incorporated in sort of your leadership and your rituals?
Yeah, so I think I'll just start with the concept of radical generosity itself towards self and others. So, um, one of my themes for the year is pace. What is the pace that I need physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, week to week, as opposed to just like always on, which is my pace, always on, just cranking. And so really working on that given the state that we're in. And so, I'm not working Fridays this year. It's something I did 20 years ago. I've been talking about for ages and ages. My Fridays are going to be my reflection time, my integration time, my breathing time, because the more time I spend doing that, the more effective I am as a leader. And so giving myself permission to do things like that, which not everyone can do, granted, because they're not their own boss. But that's a thing that I need, and I'm paying attention to what I need to take care of. The other part is, this may resonate, but it's made me a much happier person. So there's a lot of stress out there at the moment. There's some people not being so nice to each other on a day-to-day basis. When you get that sort of grumpy email coming at you or response getting at you, I've made it a big practice of taking a deep breath and going, what's the radically generous response to that person or that situation? We never really know where people are coming from, the challenges they're facing, what's going on for them. And if we are just literally that much kinder to each other, it makes us happier, first of all, to not come back with a, oh yeah, well, guess what you did to me, like it's just way too easy to be grumpy and fearful and angry, way too easy. And practicing that just helps us to have deeper empathy for one another and recognize that maybe we don't know what's going on there. And wow, she must be having a really hard day. He must be having a really hard day. So this practice of radical generosity, and it is a practice, it's not a one-time thing. It's an everyday, I'm thinking about what's a radically generous response to someone on my team. I see someone stressed out, encourage them to take a break. Do you need to take a day off or whatever those things are, right? Knowing that people will show up and do great work when they're ready to. But if you haven't created the conditions for that, it's hard to have that happen. So those are a few things.
Super helpful. I in particular like the last one. It's something that just calling your highest self, right? Like figuring out what that response looks like. Great suggestion for sure. I want to fast forward. This has been a really interesting time, as we know. It's one of my other lessons learned was just this notion of impermanence, right? And so both in terms of the things we love not being there necessarily forever, so valuing those, but also some of this existing situation as it relates to the pandemic and just society at large. What is your highest hope for 2021? What is sort of the vision you have for the world that you would like to see in 2021, and how is SheeEO or yourself, on that? How are you getting started to make that happen?
So there's a study that was done in the 60s, and it came out with what are the responses that people have during times of stress? And those responses were fight, flight, or freeze. You've heard these before?
I have.
So, right. So in terms of crisis, this is what happens. And you look around the world, you see that everywhere. However, in the early 2000s, this researcher at UCLA, Shelley Taylor, went back and she looked at these studies because it didn't resonate with her. She thought something was missing. And she went back and she looked at the experiments. They were only done on men. Of course. So she went back and did the experiments, and she found that there was another option that came up that women, that showed up with women when they get to stress, and they tend and befriend. So in times of crisis, women tend to look after the kids, look after the community, look after those around them, and befriend. They get into a social relationship with each other so that they can survive. So we reach out and we affiliate. We tend to befriend in times of crisis. And if you look at the countries in the world that are led by women and the leadership response, almost all of those responses are tend and befriend, looking after one another. versus the fight or flight or freeze that we see in lots of other places. And so my hope for 2021 is that we start to recognize this and start to recognize that there are other ways of dealing in stress than those ones that have been predominant. I feel like the world that we're living in, the old models, the old constructs, the mindsets that we had are starting to die. They need to go into palliative care, gently goodbye. And we need to birth in the new approaches. And it's not an either or, women, men, whatever. There is a new path forward, and it requires all of us to sort of deconstruct, notice the box that we're in, notice the conditioning we're in, notice that we are being conditioned to be in scarcity. We are conditioned to think there's not enough. We are conditioned to think we have to do this alone. And how can you break that down? And one of the only ways I've seen that happen is through experience. You can read a million articles about this and it doesn't really sit in, but when you actually step into it and you talk to your friends, you talk to your neighbors, you get more connected, you ask for help, you start to realize this is the answer. This is the way, getting in touch with each other. So the caring economy is what will emerge out of this. I think we're just at a very challenging time of old models dying are messy. They're really negative. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of fear. And we have to move to that heart-centered approach.
That's beautiful. You're giving me goosebumps. And as I think about sort of a vision for the world, that's really, really inspiring. So my last question for you is one that you ask a lot of people, which is, how can I help you? And I'm going to ask that both in terms of myself, how can I be helpful? I'm an activator. I'm very proud to be an activator for a number of years. But how can I personally help you? And how can this community, we have 100 people on the call and many more people who listen after the live series, how can this community help you and the SheEO community?
Thanks. Yeah, so number one is become an activator for those who aren't. Step into this, try it out. You can try it out for a couple of months, see if it fits for you. We have calls every single month. So you can experience a different way, like step into that and imagine it could be different than what you're experiencing. Don't wait, is what I would say on that front. And then I think that the second thing, a personal ask to you and to any other activators that may be on the call, is share what that feels like. Does it feel different? Is there anything that's transforming in you as you get into this different kind of community? As you participate on these calls, what are you learning? I think the differentiation, the invitation in for people is more welcoming when we actually share, like, I thought this before I did X. And then I'm like, oh, that's what it's about.
Right.
I used to think that asking for help, to your point, was like sort of taking from somebody, right? Like I would take their time or I would take their money. And it was like, and then the flip around came from the amazing goddess, Soul of Money, Lynn Twist, when she talks about people who have money or have extra time or have connections like I do, can't use them all. They need people to need what they have.
Right.
And so in fact, asking me for connections helps me to give you my connections because I can't use them all. I have them in abundance, and everybody has something in abundance. You might not be aware of it, but you'll learn what it is when you get into community with others.
Amazing. Well, call it done. I'm happy to share. And I'm sure many people on this call, based on just some of the questions even, are really enjoying this. And I encourage you to go check out what SheEO is doing. So I love, at this point in our conversation, I'd love to turn it to our community. We have some amazing questions here, and maybe I can just read a couple of them to you and have you answer live. So the first one is from Hamida. Hi, Hamida. Nice to see you. Hamida says, SheEO is doing such wonderful work. Thanks for sharing. My question is, what does SheEO get back from the business you are funding? I think you kind of touched on some of this, but maybe there's another one. As the second part of the question, it gets interesting because the question was, we know that it's debt, which is great, but how do you hold the entrepreneurs financially accountable?
Yeah, this is such an interesting question. So Hamida, I hope you don't mind if I just go boldly right into this, but
do it.
So hundreds of women have voted for you. All eyes are on you as a selected SheEO venture. Reputation is everything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, hold you accountable. There's literally, there's not a single woman I know in our network who needs to be held accountable.
Mm-hmm.
We are leading with trust in this environment. We're totally trusting entrepreneurs, and they pay this money back. There's no need to use our power over people. We use our power with people. We trust they're going to use this money to the highest and best use and pay it back over time. So that's how I'd answer that.
Amazing. Thank you. So the next question is from Renelle. Hi, Renelle. Renelle says, would love to hear any tips Vicki might have on any tips on how to become a successful woman, both in the workforce or as an entrepreneur, more so in terms of what skills to focus on. I find copying men or male strategies to appear more confident, for example, don't usually translate the same way when delivered by a female.
They do not, because we are not them and we don't look like them. And no matter what we do, like, you can't just follow that path. And I was just looking for my Insta feed because I posted this thing earlier a couple of days ago. It's actually a quote from Carl Jung, and I got a lot of feedback on it. If the path before you is clear, you're probably on somebody else's. And I love this because it's that permission space to like blaze your own trail. You literally cannot, it's not leading to follow somebody else's path. Right. You have to find your own. That's the hard part of being a human. There is no right way. You have a certain set of skills, a certain set of perspectives, a certain thing that you're here to do. And you need to find what those are for you. So I would experiment as much as possible, try things, and then reflect after you've done it, right? You're the common denominator in all these experiences. It can't always be that you have a crappy boss. You are the common denominator, right? So what situations are you putting yourself into that yield these same crappy results over and over, or these same great results, and then get more of the great results, right? So it's like paying attention to the feedback we get in every situation that we take. What does that give us? Like, I learned pretty early on that I suck as an employee. I am not a good employee. I will be booted out of your company within a couple of weeks because I'm constantly driving you crazy with a million ideas of how to make it better. And so I learned that. And as hard as the entrepreneurial path is, it's the only one I can be on. And so paying attention to who you are and having deep self-awareness is like the number one work.
Thank you. Very powerful. I'm going to ask a question from Ron Nakagawa. Hi, Ron. Nice to see you. What measures and metrics do you use to gauge success?
Yeah, so we have a number. This is a hard one because, like, what is success in a deeply relationship-based community? Like, we want a radical generosity index, but how do you measure that? It's hard. And so a few things that we look at now, obviously we look at the number of activators we have, we look at the number of ventures that we funded, we look at the payback rates on loans, because a failed venture is a double failure. It's a failure of the community as well to not support that venture and figure out how to help them. We look at reactivation rates. So what percentage of activators are coming back year over year as a sign of the quality of the experience. It's not the only sign, but it's like a sign. And we look at feedback rates, voting rates, how many people are voting, what does that look like? Lots of different metrics. We pay attention to those metrics. We track over 2,000 different metrics in our backend systems. Everything is tech enabled at SheEO, so we have a lot of data. But it doesn't, just because a payback rate is a certain thing doesn't mean it's more or less successful, right? For example, we did this thing earlier, we're like, are our voting rates too low? And then someone said, well, what percentage of people intended to vote? Not everyone intends to. So you have to find out that first, right? So data is complicated, but those are some of the metrics.
Very helpful. I'm going to ask a question from Sarah McLennan, who says, wow, hi Sarah, nice to see you. I have not been this inspired in weeks. So thanks, Vicki. Vicki, how do you overcome naysayers? What does this radical generosity look like when approaching a closed mind? How do you find common ground or start to open up minds to change?
Yeah, I don't. I just move on. And I think here's why. So I think when you're getting a really different idea off the ground that's very much outside the norm of the mindset and the narrative of the day, You're looking for those who go, yes,
Right.
and come running towards this idea in an instant. It can be that easy. It's like, Candice heard about this and was like, I'm in, count me in, this is awesome. Other people are like, well, how about this? And what about this? And how do you get a return? And like 700 questions. I'm like, oh, goodbye. We'll see you in 3 years when you see that this works, right? It's too hard to answer all those questions at first. In the first year when we were getting this off the ground, I did answer all those questions because I needed to be like grounded, rooted, and people were like, can I trust her? Has she thought this through? So I answered a lot of those questions. Now I don't answer those questions. I'm like, you've asked me more than 5 questions about this model. I'm like, see ya. Come when you're ready. Or you can go read about it in our FAQs or listen to one of the hundreds of podcasts I've done to hear how that gets responded to. Because I think none of what we're doing makes sense in theory, but it works in practice because it's so different, right? And so depending on your idea, I just would not give energy to naysayers. First of all, because it sucks the life out of me to have to answer that question for the 500th time, because it's someone trying to fit it into their mental model. And we don't fit in the old mental model.
Very powerful. And I know, I mean, it's very applicable for entrepreneurs, right? It's like, go where people want you, right? Do not focus on the people who don't, at least in the early stage.
Follow the energy.
Yeah,
Follow the energy.
I think that's great. So let's do the last question. Or maybe there's time for two or three more. There's a lot of questions, which is great. So this is from Julia. Nice to see you, Julia. And Julia says, thank you, Vicki. You've grown a massive, engaged community. I was wondering what principles or tactics you've employed throughout your journey to ensure you're building a truly helpful community, especially given your global reach. How do you maintain high quality interactions? And I'm growing a community now too, both in terms of Game Changer and Mastermind, our new company. So I'm very interested in your thoughts on building community.
Yeah, this is really interesting because we have an extremely high quality community, high level of love. I mean, we talk about this all, like, love our activators into engagement. We talk about this all the time as a team. And, you know, I've had people come to me now going, okay, so like, it's time to like really 10X this thing. You can imagine, and like super grow this thing. And, you know, you can reduce the quality of your community right now. It's very, very high quality. Like when you sign up and you put SheEO activator on your LinkedIn profile, other activators reach out and welcome you in and how can I help? And you're like kind of overwhelmed with like all these people who are like caring for you. Does it need to be that tight? And I think about this a lot because we are building this community at the speed of trust. And we have learned like exponential growth happens when it's a network-based distributed community. When 2 people tell their friends and 2 more tell their friends and 2 more and 2 more, you can really start to see this thing grow. It will grow at the pace of trust from my perspective. And so we are very, very focused on the experience, and activators volunteer to welcome in other new activators and share the journey with them. It's just like a very self-organized community volunteering to support one another. It's not, we have a tiny team of 14 people doing all of this, managing almost 100 ventures and 6,000 activators. Like it's a tiny, tiny team because we actually act like a team of 6,000. And so as long we're struggling to keep up with our community because they have so many ideas and so many things to do. And that's where I think it's the tension of that, where you find these new self-organizing structures.
Very helpful. There's just a comment you made about, you know, you're scaling this at the speed of trust. And that's a very powerful way of thinking about community building. So we have 2 questions left, which is perfect because we love letting people go 5 minutes before. Your pace comment comes to mind now when I'm thinking about that, so people don't have to do a mad dash. Let's start with Barry, who says, what is the scale of capital or investment in the fund, and what's the typical size? I'm assuming he means size of loan
size. Loan size is roughly 100K is the loan size. Yeah.
Great. And are you able to share the scale of capital or how big the fund is or how we should think about that?
Just over 6 million loaned at the moment.
Amazing. Very powerful. And last question comes from Shamima, who, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is an activator and has been since last year, which is awesome. She says she's really loving the refreshing venture funding model. My question, how does SheeEO ensure that the SheeEO staff are paid fairly?
Yeah, well, they are paid very fairly. I guess what you're asking is, how do we fund ourselves, maybe? And so, yeah, all of our salaries are like market-based. We are funded through, we've been lucky enough to be a recipient of the Women's Entrepreneurship Strategy National Ecosystem Fund in Canada. So about half of our operations are covered by Canadian government funding, which is awesome. We're in a nonprofit structure, so we can't take equity investment. And so that's an issue. Over time, this scales with activator fees covering operations, but there's that sort of like bumpy road to getting to sustainability. So through sponsorships, partnerships, and activator contributions, and the government funding keeps us going.
Amazing. So Vicki, I just want to give you the last word. You know, we're going to wrap up in a few minutes, but what would be the sort of thing that comes to mind that you want to end this call on for this community?
Yeah, I would love everybody to think of doing something non-habitually this year, something that's kind of like outside your zone of comfort. And maybe we could just end with a little exercise to keep this in mind. So if you hold up your hands in front of you and just clasp your two hands together. So clasp your two hands together and notice which thumb is over top. Okay, and how does that feel? How do your hands feel when you're doing this? And then pull your hands apart and close your hands with the other thumb on top. And yeah, right, you had to think about it for a sec. And notice and how does that feel? Like kind of a bit weird, a little different. So we're at this moment where we have to start doing non-habitual things. We're moving to this new place. Everything is going to become a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit challenging. And we have to get out of our own way to reimagine what the future can look like, to rethink what's going to be like working from home for another year, if that's the case. And with how are we dealing with our children and our elders? What does that look like? And so I think playing with this habitual, non-habitual, and recognizing that it's okay to feel a little uncomfortable. It's where growth happens. So I'd encourage everyone to like give themselves a break, practice a bit of radical generosity on yourself, and do some non-habitual things to get out of the box that you're in.
Love it. Vicki, what an honor and a pleasure having you today. I couldn't have thought of a better guest to start this new year off with. Such incredible wisdom and kindness and generosity. So thank you. And thank you to everyone for joining. And, you know, there's so many people who are so generous in making these sessions happen. First of all, my husband, who exec produces this. So thanks, Corey. And our little team, Maggie and Jerome. It's not a little team, it's a big team of Maggie and Jerome who help. And we have incredible live stream partners, Toronto Life Insider, York University, General Assembly, TechTO, Rotman, CIX, and W North. Thank you for supporting making these live streams available to your audiences as well. And of course, to my partner, Krista Kornick, who I am building Mastermind with as our partner in the series. Thank you for doing that. So I can't wait till next week. We have Kunal Gupta, who is one of the most special people. He is the director of Your Zero Studios, also the founder of Polar Mobile, and really expert in meditation. And we will spend time with him sharing how to lead and thrive in 2021. Thanks, Vicki, for joining us.